Welcome. My name is Stephanie Jackson. I am the Associate Director of Hybrid Programs here at Georgia Tech, and I would like to welcome you to this installment of our Safety Speaker Series. We expect this to be a very interesting and engaging session. Beyond compliance, running EHS like a business, not just a function, with Elizabeth Johnson, Vice President and Head of EHS, Mitsubishi Power Americas. So today, Elizabeth will challenge the traditional view of environmental health and safety as a technical support function, and instead will present a compelling case for why modern EHS departments must be led and operated like a business. Now, if this is your first time here, or maybe you are returning, I just want to remind you that the Safety Speaker Series is presented by our Professional Masters in Occupational Safety and Health. Dr. Babak Ashuri, the Executive Director of the Professional Masters in Occupational Safety and Health, could not be with us today, but Paul Schlumper will moderate in his absence, and he's going to introduce our program and tell you a little bit about our speaker today. Paul?
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Schlumper. I'm the Director of Safety, Health, Environmental Services at Georgia Tech, and also a member of the faculty for PMOSH. Before we get started with our speaker series, I want to tell you a little bit more about PMOSH, Professional Masters in Occupational Safety and Health. As you can see from the slide, we deal with a variety of different topics in PMOSH: business, leadership, technical skills, all in the area of occupational safety and health and risk management. So this is a 2-year program, primarily virtual, with 3 campus visits, beginning, middle, and end. You go through the program with a cohort of other students, so you get to know each other real well and take the classes together and work on projects and ultimately your capstone together. So as you can see from the slide, we look at first-rate safety action plans. We solve real-world problems, use exercises, case study, labs, and we try to take a business approach and look at costs and benefits of safety and health improvement projects. So it is tailored towards working professionals. You take 1 class at a time, as I mentioned, primarily online, and then the program culminates with a capstone project. You work with a small team to solve a safety and health program. And as you can see at the bottom of the slide, you do enjoy some benefits. You will earn a graduate safety practitioner or GSP designation in addition to your professional master's degree from Georgia Tech. So we'll show you a little more information about PMOSH in just a little while after the program. But at this point, I want to turn it over to one of our most distinguished PMOSH alums, Elizabeth Johnson. As Stephanie mentioned, she's the Vice President and Head of Environmental Health and Safety from Mitsubishi Power Americas. Elizabeth, take it away.
Thanks, Paul. That means a lot. I didn't realize I was one of the more distinguished ones. So yeah, I am an alumni of the program. Second cohort that went through, and phenomenal program. And again, I'll talk more about how this program has really impacted me as a leader. Not just in my organization, but really as safety as a whole. But I could not be more excited to be back with Georgia Tech to kind of talk about something that is really important and passionate. That I'm very passionate about, in my career. And that's really, how we transition from leading EHS, as a compliance function into more of a business, and really talking about, 3 major pillars and how to do that. And one is building trust, building brand, and building culture. But before I really dive in to that, I think it's pretty critical that how did I get here? What, in my life, brought me to this point. And well, I started my career in EHS in compliance. I started as an OSHA compliance officer. You really can't get more knee deep in compliance than with OSHA. And when I was with OSHA, my job was to, enforce the rules. I think everybody who's a safety professional at this point, has dealt with OSHA on one level if you're not working for them as an organization. And when you're enforcing rules and you're checking those boxes and you're making sure that paperwork is lined up and it's correct, you kind of start to think that maybe this is what leadership is. It's about getting it all right. If an organization can pass an audit, then they've got to be doing something right. They have to have strong leadership. But over time, you kind of mature a little bit and you get a little bit more, especially as I got into the private sector of things, I realized that why compliance is absolutely critical. It's the foundation of who we are as a organization, as a field with VHS. It's the bare minimum. We've all heard that the OSHA standard is the bare minimum, but clients compliance management is really the floor. It's not the ceiling. Um, it's absolutely necessary, but for a business, it's not transformative. So while compliance keeps us safe, business alignment is what makes us relevant in the EHS world. There is a great coach, and wrote several books. His name is Peter Drucker, and his philosophy is that organizations should focus on people, purpose, and results, and not just efficiency. He believes in management is human-centered discipline, more than just it's more art than science. And if you ever get an opportunity to pick up one of his leadership books, I highly recommend it. But one of his quotes that really stuck out to me, and it's something that I've, kind of taken heart in my career, is that management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. Now, for me, this distinction completely reframed how I think about EHS and how I manage safety, because again, when we're managing safety well, we're managing compliance, but we're not necessarily leading things strategically. And so as I, grew in my career and joined different industries, I really started to see that a lot of the most successful industries out there were ones that didn't treat EHS as something that was necessary or a gatekeeper. Those that really saw true success, had EHS embedded in the organization because they value, they drove value. And that realization, throughout my career is something that, has led me to not only think differently, but I communicate differently and I lead my team and I look at the world from EHS, a little bit different. So what does that mean? So when I say run EHS like a business, what am I really, really talking about? There's four, I think, disciplines in business that makes a business successful. Strategy. Any business, you can look at any organization out there, think about the big names and how they went from something small into something large. It's because they had goals. They knew where they were going and they knew why they were going there. On top of that is metrics. To me, I kind of put this into, even those who are in the PMOSH program, which again, it was such a huge impact in my career was this program. But that's where you really understand that compliance aspect. You understand the details. You understand what the data is, and it's more than just performance. It's more than just activities, but those metrics are critical. That's where we get our subject matter expertise from. But then you also have customer mindset is really kind of that third, pillar of this when I talk about business, and while most of us, working for companies, we have our outside customers, Mitsubishi Power, we build turbines, for, large power organizations. We have customers globally that have our product in there and we work with them, throughout the year on different aspects. And while we work and we need to support them, from an EHS standpoint, our true customers are our employees. Those are our coworkers. Those are the teams that are out there working on our product. And those are who our true workforce, are. In addition to that, we also have our executive, our leadership customers, how are we need to help and support them. And again, it's also communities. How are we embedded in our organization? So all of that is something that EHS professionals, we really need to kind of start having that customer mindset. And then let's talk innovation. We are a department of the rule book says we have to be innovative. We have to challenge old models. We have to find better ways to work. And I say that because too often EHS is often viewed as a cost center. We are something that prevents loss rather than necessarily creating value. And I hear this all the time with EHS professionals. How do we get buy-in, from leadership? How do we sell this idea to leadership? And that's because if you're doing that, you're being seen as really a cost center, and not something of really value. So when we apply those business principles, and we start speaking the same language as your executive leadership, that's when things change, because we move from we have to do this to meet a regulation, we have to do this to be compliant, into here's how an investment advance the business goals. You're accomplishing the same thing, but your language is different, and that's really what's key. We really have to realize that in order to bring value to an organization, we have to get the organization to realize that we value people. And that is the way that we drive performance, in that sense, is that we have to convert our language into something that really is business related. So, and simply put, we have to transform a being a department that says no, we can't do that, into a being a support function that says how can we get that done? Yes, it's going to be challenging. Yes, it's going to be hard, but we have to figure out how to make that happen. And I wish I could say it's been smooth sailing. I wish I could say that I had all the answers in the world to say this is how you get from point A to point B with no roadblocks, whatsoever. But I had a huge wake up call in my career a couple years ago, and that's just where this all kind of came to head for me. So when I joined Mitsubishi Power in 2020 during, the midst of COVID. And I joined as the leader of one of our large manufacturing sites, just on the coast of Georgia, and came in and started running the safety team there. And this is again, we're talking vaccines, craziness, 6 foot of separation. How do you run a business in the middle of that when you're all a bunch of essential workers? Simultaneously, during that time frame, our executive corporate leadership, headquarters, if you want to call it, we're going through several different transitions. And during, some of those transitions, the actual head of EHS role turned over twice in the first year that I was with the organization. So as you can imagine, being an EHS professional, that didn't really instill stability with it. So the second time that role came up, I was like, you know what? I'm a leader of this group. I'm going to throw my name in the hat because I don't expect to get the role, but I think the experience would be good. I knew that you'd be exposed to the C-suite of the organization for interview processes and all that sort of stuff. And I really, wanted to just kind of say, hey, maybe I can get this chance to try out, knowing that the next time might be the right time for me. Well, that thought process backfired completely because I ended up getting the role, which was a great, opportunity. And so several years ago, when I walked into head of EHS for Mitsubishi Power, I didn't know exactly what to expect. Been in the organization for a little over a year at that point. And then I just didn't know the scale really of the challenges I've had. And so that first 6 months as head of EHS, just imagine, trying to be, and this is so cliche in a sense, but, the mountain climbers of Everest, in a snowstorm, just leaning into the mountainside and taking one step at a time and just focusing on the next step. That was the first 6 months. We had just a lot of things that we had to rebuild with our foundation. We completely restructured the EHS team, cleaned up so much legacy, issues of constantly kind of having that turnover from the years prior. A lot of things started and never got picked back up, and transition happens. And there was just a tremendous amount of low-hanging fruit, in a sense that we had to come in and correct and pull together and connect the dots on so many ways. And we had a small team at the time, and we just kind of came in every single day and said, hey, this is the dumpster fire we're going to put out today. And then tomorrow, this is the next one. And we're going to, start building this foundation one brick at a time. And at the end of the first full 12 months of a fiscal year, I had the absolute exciting opportunity to stand up in front of our entire executive staff, C-suite, plus all of our business unit leaders, and say, we did it. We set a company record for our safety KPIs. We had incredible data, and this is something that this team had worked together so hard. And it was something as simple as just having the visibility of what we were actually doing on an enterprise level. And that was huge. And making minor tweaks. We didn't implement anything radical. We just did the basic stuff of look at the data, process the data, implement the data. And just that alone, we set a record, and it was a phenomenal year. And I remember standing in front of the C-suite, at an operations meeting in front of basically all of the leaders in the company. And I'm like, best day of my career. Like, I get to tell them, we did it. We set a record, and then this should be great. But as I stood there, you kind of get to read the room and you realize that there's some head nodding, but nobody's quite as energetic as you would expect them to, be when you get to tell the CEO and the senior vice presidents that we had a phenomenal safety record here. And that's when I realized that they were looking at me going, okay, what are you hiding? And that's what hit me. We weren't trusted as as a department. We weren't trusted as a value. We had delivered exceptional results, but we did not have the belief system in place. We had built performance, but we failed to create credibility. And that really was the wake up call for me, because that was when I realized, you know what? The metrics aren't enough. The safety metrics are just not enough. We needed to lead culture, not just manage compliance. And that meant that we needed to build a brand that people trusted and believed in. And that realization at that point became the foundation of everything that I have done since in the last several years. Before that aha moment, I had an opportunity to meet an incredible leader several years ago. And it was actually when I was a PMOSH student. I believe it's the second year in PMOSH when you get to go and see other companies. In my cohort year, we toured Coca-Cola and the Atlanta airport. If you ever get a chance to go tour Coca-Cola, please do. Their customer experience lobby area is just phenomenal, from a technology standpoint, from a branding standpoint. It's just really honestly amazing. But we also got to go tour the Atlanta airport. And living in Savannah, there's only, you can fly one way anywhere as long as you're going to Atlanta, because there you're going to have a connecting flight to go to the rest of the world. And so I can't tell you how many times at that point that I had been through Atlanta airport. And every time since then, this moment comes back to me, tenfold. But we got to tour Atlanta airport and we got to see underground where baggage claim was. We got to go on the roof where they were doing construction. There's a picture of my team. We were at one of our groups called us the Dukes of Hazards, but it was our cohort team that we all sat together with on day one. And we were now kind of approaching the end, and there's a picture of the four of us, and that is on my desk. It's just another great memory of this program and what it meant to me. But after we kind of did our tour, they pulled us into this conference room. There were several people from the Atlanta airport that got to come by and talk to us about processes and procedures and training and everything that an EHS professional, especially a student at PMOSH, would just eat up, because you're seeing what you're being taught come to life. And it was such a great conversation. And then kind of towards the tail end, this gentleman walks in. And immediately the whole room just kind of changes, because you're like, okay, this guy's the boss. And he was the CEO of the time. His name is Dr. Kofi Smith. He's also a Georgia Tech alumni. And he came in very excited to see us, very engaged, very energetic. He's one of those is a true alumni. Just wanted to be a part of a bunch of other people that were, just as joyous about Georgia Tech as he was. But he told us a couple of things about his leadership style and about how he built his brand and how he built his support system. He's the type of leader that it doesn't matter if you are his COO or you're a brand new janitor on the second day of work. He wants to know you by name, and he wants to know how you impact the organization because he sees value in every single person on his staff. He sees what they all bring to the table, and he wants to make sure that they know that he appreciates what they do. And I think that for me at that particular time, this is the leader of the Atlanta airport, the world's busiest airport. And he wants to make sure that he knows the name of of the new forklift driver or the new janitor or the new, assistant or the new operational leader the day that they arrive. And not only that, he wants to know about them as a person and as a human. And just from a leadership standpoint, that stood out because he was so genuine about it. He got to the position that he was in and he didn't lose his values. He didn't lose what was important to him as a person. And he told us this story about every year he writes Christmas cards to everyone on his staff, not his direct staff, everyone that worked for him at the Atlanta airport, the world's busiest airport. That's a lot of Christmas cards. And he was very, transparent in the fact that this is not something that it's a Christmas card. And he just comes in, he signs his name like he's giving out autographs. It wasn't that. It wasn't something that he came in and him or maybe his assistant just stamped his signature. No, this was a personalized Christmas card to every single employee because he knew their name, he knew their value, he knew what they brought to the table. And to me, that clicked for me when I was standing in that room and I realized that I had not built trust. I had not built a brand with my executives. Because going back to the example that Dr. Smith left is that I realized that we were managing risk, we were managing compliance, we were managing numbers, but we were not managing belief. And it was that shift from operational accountability into emotional ownership, from transitioning from counting incidents into building influence. Because like Dr. Smith, he built his defining moments with those personal relationships. He built the trust. He built the belief in his team. And that was something that at that particular time, after a phenomenal year of safety records, I had failed to do as a leader. And so that is what sparked, me to start thinking as EHS as a brand, not just a function, but how do we build it as a brand? How do we build that trust? And so building and scaling, EHS as a function, the first thing you kind of have to ask yourself is if we were a true business, how would we be set up to succeed? And it led me to rethink a couple of things. I needed to understand how accountability and ownership were structured. How can we hold each other accountable, but how can we also have ownership? How do we develop talent and build succession pipelines? That's critical. Any business that's going to continue to grow, you have to invest in your own people. We needed to measure performance beyond injury rates. TRI is great, but it's lagging. How do we focus on the leading? How do we adapt that mindset where we focus more on engagement, we focus more on prevention, and we really start developing what value looks like? That's value creation. How do we become irreplaceable, as a business to our customers, which are our employees? And so I started embedding, EHS into our business planning, and not just, with operational checklists, not just saying, hey, we want to bring leaders into audits. That we did that, but we did way more than that. Because ultimately, from a strategy standpoint, we wanted to have the conversation shift from, do we need EHS? Is EHS coming? To we can't make this decision without EHS at the table. We needed to be so valuable that people stopped and said, we're not moving forward until we get the advisement and the support from our EHS team. That didn't happen overnight. Um, it took credibility. It took consistency. It took discipline. And it just took determination to again lean into that hill, for the next evolution. Jim Collins has a great quote that I kind of have scribbled out, and it's taped to my main monitor, and that is, greatness is not a function of circumstance. Greatness, it turns out, is largely a matter of conscious choice and discipline. And that's what we did to build value, is that we made our choices, and we stuck to it, even when it was hard. And again, at the end of the day, that's what we're building. That's what we're building at Mitsubishi Power, is a disciplined, trusted EHS organization that has earned a place to be a part of the total business conversation. There's a lot of things that I did, but there was one key thing after that KPI readout, and I realized that we didn't have trust as an organization, that I did start building that both internally and then also with our operational support. Launched something called, what we call internally, called the Safety Summit. And the Safety Summit is an opportunity for all of our internal EHS professionals to come together. I call it for about the wildest 48 hours. And it is a 2-day event where we spend a day and a half doing training, team building, professional development. This year we had Paul and Jenny come down and teach us a couple of courses, and it was great. But we move around the country to support different groups and different, units. And it's a way to kind of network, because I realized back then, several years ago when this first launched, that while we had a very good handful of really exceptional EHS professionals, most of them hadn't met each other, hadn't met EHS professionals in different teams, may have swapped an email, may have been on a phone call, but never actually been in the same room with them. And so that was really critical for us as an internal department, is to sit here and go, we need to know each other. We can't continue to operate in silos. We can't continue to operate as individuals. So how do we do this, from an internal standpoint? And so really wanted to pull that together. Two, this was coming off of, the end of COVID. The teams were exhausted. We were fragmented. We really, in a lot of ways had felt kind of unseen, in a sense, like many EHS teams after that. We were the essential workers that also became part HR, came part, finance, came part maintenance, because we were essential to be on staff. And I really wanted to take a moment to celebrate, the hard work and success of this team, for that. I also knew within our company that there were many other organizations like sales and HR and operations that had at least an annual offsite, meeting, if not something that was quarterly. And somehow through the history of our organization, ours was not something that was, traditionally, or at least held on a regular basis. And I wanted to put an end to that. This is also kind of a lesson of, sometimes in leadership, you have to be bold. And I say that because, again, this is coming off about 60 some odd days after, presenting a whole bunch of really good KPI information that leadership didn't quite buy into. And I went to them and I said, hey, I'm doing this. I'm creating a summit and I'm pulling our teams in. And we're going to do this, and we're going to have training, and we're going to have networking, and we're going to have a dinner. We're going to celebrate. We're going to hand out awards. But we're also going to have an afternoon where we're going to have Q&A sessions with our operational leadership, and you are going to be there. This wasn't just vice presidents of operational groups. This was a conversation directly with our CEO. The best part is that they all showed up. They all came. And the afternoon on the second day, we had a phenomenal Q&A session. The first one was with a lot of our operational leaders, and this was the first time a lot of our EHS professionals were in the same room with the senior operational partner groups that they supported. And it was a great Q&A session, learned a lot of value information being shared back and forth, and just really starting to build that relationship. Now, the second Q&A session, I got to be the moderator for, because it was the one with our CEO. And again, Bill, he's a phenomenal person. He, at this point, was a little over a year into his, being transitioned into CEO. So he was kind of still relatively new to his position. And if anybody's ever been a moderator for kind of one of these Q&A sessions, there's a little bit of prep work that goes behind scenes. You talk about what questions you're going to ask, and you may do a dry run. And so I had the opportunity to kind of prep with Bill before the summit. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, we're going to start this off. And I asked him the first question. And I distinctly remember what the first question was, because it was like, Bill, what's your vision? What's your goal for how EHS and operations are going to work together moving forward? And he had a great answer that we prepped for. And at that particular moment, in a live panel, the CEO of my company looked at me and said, "That's a great question, but I want to hear what yours are." Okay, we're going off script. So, like any normal person, I froze, was completely unprepared, to answer that. And I can completely validate from there on out, we stayed off script. But it turned into be one of the most authentic conversations that we've ever had about safety and culture and what it means and where we wanted to grow our brand as a company as a whole and where we needed to focus on as an EHS as an organization. That summit became more than just, an event. It became a symbol. It showed that leadership was invested, that EHS mattered, and that trust was being rebuilt from the inside and from the top as well. Not long after that, Bill launched brand new company values. Safety is on that list. And so it was that validation that we had shifted, from being untrusted, questioned, basically from just being compliance readouts to now being a trusted partner in rebuilding culture. And so that was a huge moment for us, and that really set the tone for how we're operating, forward. And so, kind of moving forward, knowing that a lot of people on the call here are, maybe you're mid in your career, or you're emerging leader, or maybe you're a professional and you're trying to figure out, how do I adapt? How do I make this connection kind of going forward? And so how do you start looking at the next steps of building, your brand and your business, from an EHS perspective? Couple piece of advice from my own experience. One is that you have to start thinking and acting like executive leaders before you even have the title. And I know that sounds a little cliche because everybody's heard, the saying, hey, dress for the role that you want, not the role that you have. But there's so much value in that. When you start talking about executives, there's very few of them that lead and lead well alone. They all have their connections. What who is their marketing person? We all know that while we consistently work as an EHS department behind the scenes, and most of us are quite happy being the person that, ensures that everything goes smoothly, and then we just kind of walk away and we take on the next challenge. If you're really starting to want to advance from where you are in your career into kind of what the next step, the next level is, and you can do this at any level, you have to be able to let people know what you're doing. Communication matters. Clear communication matters. Giving credit where credit is due. And sometimes it's just as simple as ensuring that people know that EHS is doing a wellness fair, or we're doing a training class or something along those lines, and letting everyone know how we impact and connect with the organization. The other thing actually has really nothing to do with EHS, but it's critical for anyone in any organization, and that is to learn how your company makes money. I think all of us can work for an organization and we can, with confidence tell people, hey, this is our product, this is what we do. But do you really understand how we make the money? And that's critical because without with a business that doesn't make money, then you don't have a business, which means you don't have a job. So ultimately, at the end of the day, everyone is working for that goal. But if you learn how your company makes money, then you also learn how you impact that, positive and negatively. And I think that's very, very critical. The biggest thing that I can also say from an advice standpoint is sit in the meetings that aren't necessarily EHS. Um, Not too long ago, I had a couple of people on my staff say, "Hey, I've got to present in the monthly ops meeting for my business unit or my department, and I'm going to get in there and I'm going to EHS, presents first. It takes 10 minutes. I'm going to step in, I'm going to do my part, and then I'm going to step out because the rest of the meeting doesn't matter. Doesn't impact me. It does. Stay in the meeting. If you're asked to leave, I'd ask why, because you should be in that meeting. Those meetings are absolutely vital for us to learn where the company is growing, what the challenges are, what the successes are, what's coming around the bend, for us to be able to help and support and strategize. Because you may learn that HR is having a recruiting challenge. And so that gives you an insight that maybe the next batch of people is going to be thinner, which means we're going to be putting more demand on our active employees, which maybe we have a fatigue problem. So all of this is huge, for you to be in there to start connecting the dots on how EHS impacts your company and impacts your business. Just because it's not your meeting, it doesn't mean that you don't need to be in there. The last thing that I'll say is, as ask your leaders what success looks like for them. And what I mean by that is don't go ask your boss saying, "Hey, how can I be the most successful EHS professional?" That should be a one-on-one conversation that you're already having. And if you're not, then put it on your list of things to do. But you should be going to your general manager, your vice president, somebody that's maybe even out that should be outside of the EHS professional, and say, "Hey, what does success look like for you? Not just for the EHS perspective, but for the business, for a whole." And then figure out how to connect your work to that definition. Meaning, if the GM's goal is to produce X amount more product, then from an EHS perspective, how do we support that, but make it the safest way possible, or the cleanest way, or the most environmental friendly? Whatever your scope is, how do you connect to that goal? Because at some point in everyone's EHS career, I think we all kind of transition and realize that we all think that because we have a rule book, whether it's 1910 or 1920 or whatever it is that we have to follow of standards, that influence does not come from authority. It comes from alignment. And so that is where I think that we all from, in EHS, professionals, that we need to kind of realize that while we may have the authority to ensure that we're following compliance regulations, that doesn't necessarily give us the influence because we're not necessarily aligned. So if you have that gap, go back and look at that, because there's a quote from Dr. Covey that says, "Seek first to understand, then to be understood." And so when you understand the business, you can position your safety as a strategy, not just a requirement. And that's how you earn a seat at the table. And eventually, you'll learn how to lead that table as well. So here, just kind of a closing thoughts, and I'm glad to take questions if there are any questions, at the end of it. When I look back on my journey from a compliance officer, from an OSHA compliance officer, to now as a member of the executive team for a multi-billion-dollar, organization, some of the biggest lessons that I've learned is that EHS isn't about what we prevent. It's about what we enable. We enable reliability, productivity, innovation, and trust. We enable people to thrive in a culture that values them. And we enable companies to grow responsibly with purpose and accountability. So my challenge to you, because I think that's part of being, an executive leader, is that we have to challenge people. But my challenge to you and everyone on the call is to not just run your EHS program, but run your EHS business. Think bigger, lead broader, build a brand that earns trust. Because when you do, when you treat your EHS organization like a business, you build a brand that earns trust. And that's when you stop managing safety and start leading culture. I cannot thank you how much I'm just honored and flabbergasted to be a part, to be back here with Georgia Tech. And I hope that everyone gains some sort of insight, from this, from my lessons and, my mistakes and my biggest attributes from what I have in my career.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. That was truly amazing. You did a great job. Thank you so much. Really great insight into your career and your journey. So, just to tell the group, we have some time for questions and answers. So please put your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We do have one question in already, and I'll go ahead and read it for you. It's several parts. So the question is, what did follow-up look like in the days, weeks after the summit you described? Were there call to action items? If so, who was responsible? Are there specific things you could suggest that made a difference after the adrenaline of the event wore off to ensure it keeps moving forward?
Yeah, that's several parts in there. So, kind of going up to the first part, if I recall correctly, what was the follow up to that event? Yeah, I mean, first of all, the first thing we did is turn around and immediately start planning the following year. We took the hype and the excitement and everybody's buy-in and said, hey, we need to start planning for next year. And we started locking that in because we didn't want to lose that momentum. There was a huge amount of call to action, as well in that for both internally and then also with our operational leaders too. So internally, we had a session, with just, the entire EHS department where we asked each other, what can we do better? What can we improve on? How do we become better aligned? And out of that session, there was probably three or four, dozen action items that came out of that. And we went around the room and said, hey, who's taking this? Who's taking that? And then we met from, my direct staff, and it was kind of when the things fled out. So a lot of those changes happened with internal leadership within the EHS team. So there's some ownership to it, which was fantastic. There was a couple other things too from our executive and our operational leader standpoint, call of action, and a lot of those, really it was the EHS team saying, "Hey, Elizabeth, we want you to go ask for this. We want you to go learn more about this." And so, I was in some ways kind of the sacrificial lamb as the leader that came up and said, "Hey, we need to make these improvements. We need to carve out, budget. We need to, invest in training. We need to invest in systems. We need you to buy into these different metrics and models and stuff." And that was, again, there were some things, again, happened relatively quickly. Others of it was just the beginning of a long-term walk. And I feel like I've got half of those questions. So which ones am I missing off of that list?
Did you talk about you talked a little bit about the responsibility for action items? Did you talk about that?
Yeah, so again, I mean, that was something that we did internal, for a lot of our internal groups, and then a lot of that I took as well and managed. So it was halfway. But again, we pulled this into, we have monthly operational lead out for our CEO, and so I took the action to put those actions in that, from not only my holding myself accountable, but also keeping that topic relevant until it was completed.
Awesome. Thank you. We have another question. And this question starts with a strong thank you for the presentation. And the question reads, as an outside provider of services that enhance EHS for companies, this person is a physical therapist providing early intervention services. What is the best way to connect with EHS departments and demonstrate that early intervention services are a worthwhile investment?
Um, Organically, is the best way I can say. From being on LinkedIn, I can't tell you how many um connections that I get on a daily basis. Somehow somebody gets a hold of my email, and then all of a sudden I've got spam out the galore. So the best way to say, we go to conferences, we go to, conventions, we go to all of this sort of stuff. Be there, be present, shake the hand, make that personal connection at that point. Ask us, what we're looking for, what we need, and then tailor your message to cater to that. Don't give us the hard sale, because we get that all the time. You just become a number at that point. But do your, I mean, it's like an interview. Do your research, figure out who we are and where we are. I don't expect you to know everything about the company, but if you're going to try to sell me something, then I expect you to at least know how to, what we kind of do.
Awesome. And this came in from the chat. No questions, but thank you for your presentation, Elizabeth, once again. This person says, may not work in EHS, but it was very informative and would take the knowledge to heart as I grow in my career. So another heartfelt thank you to you from one of the attendees today. So awesome.
Thanks a lot.
Another question just came in for you. Thank you for the insightful webinar. How can I convince executive leadership that EHS is a valuable resource to our institution's operations and to rapidly move towards hiring qualified staff? Our EHS team has had significant turnover in the past 6 months, with 5 out of 7 departing.
So to me right now, that's telling me you have a culture problem. You have an internal culture problem within your EHS team. And so right off the bat, the EHS team as alone needs to start building trust amongst themselves. It doesn't matter what your executive leadership does. If you don't have good culture within your team, you're just not going to be successful in that sense. As far as, and again, just to kind of harp on that a little bit more, do a team dinner. Do something offsite where you just kind of get to know each other. That goes such a long way with that. Now, as far as going to the executive leadership and saying, hey, we need to hire better, more informative, you're also going to have to be able to show proof of why. And this is kind of going back to what I said about building the brand, of the team. And so as simple as we have something at Mitsubishi Power, that is it's an internal social media type thing where you can, post a picture and then, kind of put a little blurb at the bottom. It's kind of like Instagram, but for the business. And so we do that often. I mean, it's just, it's casual photos of, hey, this is us, teaching first aid, and this is how we're implementing, or we'll take a picture of an employee and say, hey, such and such is, doing this for mental health awareness, or something along those lines where it shows that we're having influence and impact. And once you start building that brand of that value of how you're impacting the organization for the positive, it's a lot easier to ask for resources from executives at that point, because they want to continue to invest in something positive. If they're not getting it out of a department, it doesn't matter if this is EHS or finance or whatever, if the department has a challenge, then they're most likely to stand back and say, let's see what happens here, because throwing people at it isn't necessarily going to be the solution. So my biggest response there would be for that EHS team to kind of pause and say, what's going on in our department and why are we having turnover?
Outstanding. Now we have one question in the Q&A and 2 more in the chat. So in the Q&A, the question is, building off the prior question, what strategies have helped you sustain the importance of safety during times of leadership change?
Not panicking. That's just it. So, or at least keep the panic internal. No, I think a lot of the strategies is one, if you're going to start really looking at strategy, is a puzzle piece. And as puzzle pieces get moved around, you got to figure out how they fit together. And sometimes when things are shifted, you've got to be able to kind of think around the curve and 2 steps ahead. So that's really, that impact. The other big thing for strategy is that when there's a gap, regardless if it's in my subject matter expertise or not, whenever there's a gap, be willing to support, be willing to help. Because if you're a part of the solution, then you're never going to be seen as part of the problem. So sometimes it takes us, as leaders, and again, you can do this as a coordinator, a specialist, or a vice president, doesn't matter. If you're willing to help and to be there to support the business as a whole, it's a big impact and will eventually pay off coming back to your department. And so, that's something that I've done as part of being members of different boards, leading, everything from women in energy to, operational excellence teams, things like that. Just volunteer and be supportive and be involved.
Very good. I love this next question. How did the PMOSH program elevate your career?
Oh, this is the easiest one. It got me my job at Mitsubishi. That's it. So uh, it was in the middle of COVID. I was the class of 2020, the second cohort that came through. I was with an organization that, as COVID was kind of shutting things down, while I knew my job was secure, all of my resources just kind of disappeared overnight. And I happened to see this job posting for, Mitsubishi. And really, the first thing I had to do was learn how to pronounce it, which was challenging enough as it is. But just kind of threw my name in the hat. And then during the interview process, they were really excited because I was one of the few people that came with an almost um, master's degree. And by the time I got the end of the interview process, I had graduated with the tail end of July and then was actually starting in the fall with the organization. But so I recently graduated, and they were really, really impressed with that. Plus, it was Georgia Tech, and Mitsubishi Power had already had some interactions with some of the training with Georgia Tech, so it was a great alumni connection there, kind of already living off the brand and the reputation of the company. And so that got me with got my foot in the door with Mitsubishi, and then after that, um, my capstone project for the PMOSH program, my team and I, we did like an emergency action plan for an organization, which doesn't sound all that complicated, but a lot of the things that I learned about how business functions and how it works, during that capstone project, I was able to kind of really start and build that as the foundation into how I led in my organization. And that really launched my brand promotion, trail through Mitsubishi Power. And then two, I mean, like I said, Dr. Smith, who's a Georgia Tech alumni, I was exposed to him through PMOSH. He has no idea who I am, which is fine. I follow him on social media. I think he's a phenomenal leader, a phenomenal person. Never would have had that opportunity to even be exposed to him if it wasn't for PMOSH. And then finally, I mean, there's a couple of really great professors, there. I mean, not saying that Paul's one of them, but he might be one of them. And there's Jenny, all the stuff that I talk to frequently because I'm like, situation hypothetically. So, and it's great to have a fantastic sounding board to run those hypothetical situations across and seek that guidance. So I would not be in the seat that I'm in today if it wasn't for Georgia Tech.
Great answer. Great answer.
And it's
Next,
not
next,
paid endorsement, let me tell you that.
that's right. I did not pay her for that answer. Next question. Do you have a recommendation for a company culture assessment? Do you think they are valuable tools?
I think I don't have a recommendation for an individual one, but I do think that anything that you believe brings value brings value. So it's very subjective. And so if you put everything that you have into those, type of support systems, then you're going to get the support out of them that you need. If you expect them to come in and fix a problem, but you put no effort in it, then it's not going to be fixed. But they're a great advisement and support group, if you want to use the tool and use the tool correctly.
We have another question in the Q&A now. How has the rapid advancement of technology and AI affected your role or company? Do you think it helps or affects things as they are?
Uh, From a business standpoint, if you've heard the phrase data centers, we build, turbines. We support the power industry, and so we're in a boom right now. We are growing. We can't keep up with the growth. We're expanding. Real estate is all of a sudden a very hot topic for us, and so in that sense, it has a huge positive impact for our company as a whole. For EHS standpoint, we're using a system now that we're entering our data in, and we're trying to get into something called predictive analytics. We're trying to see, like, hey, if we have all this historic stuff and it ebb and flows, how can we start predicting where we may have challenges coming up for it? And while it's not 100% guaranteed, as somebody who is a total geek when it comes to data, I get really excited about it because, again, it allows us to kind of have, maybe a little bit of foresight, maybe a little bit of, insight of what's to come and how can we be better prepared? Because ultimately, that's our job function, is how do we be prepared and prevent? And so I see it as a huge plus. A lot of people are concerned that AI is going to take away jobs. There's not a single person on my staff that their job is going to go away because of AI, but I do see a lot of people on my staff having better support and better tools because of AI.
Awesome. Awesome. We've got just a few minutes left. If there's any more questions, please put them in the Q&A for us. Kirk, can you go ahead and show that last slide just to give folks information about PMOSH while people are thinking of that last question? Just so everybody knows, we do these speaker series periodically. The next one is not, we don't have a firm scheduled date yet, but keep an eye on your email and we'll be letting you know about it. But if we have any folks out there that are interested in PMOSH, please scan the QR code. You can get all the information you need from the website that comes up. And as you see on the screen, applications for fall 2026 are open. The early application deadline is March 1st, 2026. So if you're interested, go ahead and apply. It's a great time to do that. And of course, feel free to contact any of us with any questions about PMOSH. So any other questions before we adjourn this session? Once again, Elizabeth, thank you so much. You did a great job. I thoroughly enjoyed your session.
We have
Thank you
one
so
more
much.
question.
Oh, we have another question. Go ahead.
Yes. What challenges did you face while building your safety team?
All of them. Pick one. I faced it. No, I think a lot of it was, again, we did a complete restructure of our organization. So it took convincing leadership to say, hey, EHS didn't need to report into operations. It needed to be reported into EHS. That was one of them. We did have to find talent. We had to look through all of that. But again, we had to go back and really kind of restructure our foundation, our policies, procedures, audits, try to streamline everything along those lines. And none of it was horrible or you're not capable of doing, on an individual basis. But when you looked kind of back and you said, hey, we did all of that in that time period, that's where it was really just, again, determination, is what got us through it that first, I'd say 18 months.
And there's one more question. Will the materials be shared? Stephanie, can you speak to that?
I sure can. Yes, the recording will be shared in a few days once we get the materials downloaded, and we'll share that recording with all of our attendees and folks who registered as well.
Well, once again, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please join us again at the next one, and let us know if you have any questions about PMOSH. Y'all have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
attending. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
That was a great session.
It really was. Elizabeth was fantastic.
Yeah.